1998 would be a year with more innovation ever seen from Intamin. But first, let's discuss Asuka at the famous Disneyland knockoff, Nara Dreamland. This coaster featured the classic Cyclone layout, but looked to have incredible airtime throughout, and operated a short life at the park until its closure in 2006. This year would see the debut of a brand new track style for Intamin, which proved so successful it is still used today. A 3-pipe triangle cross-tie track. This design provided the dynamic banking radius needed for tight turns and elements, while also having the sturdy structure needed to comfortably absorb the forces and maintain a smooth ride. The first ride to ever open with this track would be Mont Makaya at Terra Encantada. This would use a similar car design to Lethal Weapon Pursuit, but with a much longer 7-car train, and shattering Intamin's previous inversion record with a staggering 8, tied for the most on any coaster at the time. These included a vertical loop, a cobra roll, 2 corkscrews, and most innovative of all, a triple heartline roll. This amazing, disorienting element would not have been possible without the shaping innovated on Lethal Weapon Pursuit, and became a building block for a very long series of multi-inversion coasters to come. This would only be the first half of coasters to open this year though, as this new track would also be flipped upside down for 2 new inverted coasters as well. Both using the LSM technology created the year before, these models were made to be an alternative to the inverted coaster that rival European companies B&M and Vekoma had debuted earlier in the 90s. These would be totally unique to those though, as the launches were much more the focus rather than the inversions. This debuted with Linear Gale at Tokyo Dome City, which would be a shuttle coaster that would travel back and forth on 2 straight spikes. Not only that, the coaster would be located on top of a building in downtown Tokyo, providing some of the most surreal visuals of any ride. This would only be the warm-up though, as the last coaster of 1998 would be Intamin's most dynamic ride to date. For years, King's Dominion was looking to build a coaster that would interact with the park's famous man-made mountain, which had held multiple attractions in its existence. Intamin's concept would be Volcano the Blast Coaster, which would be the first ever full-circuit multi-launch coaster, sending riders out of and circling the rockwork with 3 heartline rolls. The ambition to build a multi-launch prototype inverted coaster around an existing structure with incredible fire effects proved to be a massive success, and not only proved to be a fan favorite, but truly drew the eyes to Intamin, as Volcano was one of the best coasters ever made to that point. The next year would be another year of experimenting for Intamin, starting with another mystery coaster. Not every ride can be a success, and Future World Experience would be another in the line of unknown rides. It is said to have been an interactive coaster with 3D glasses and screens mounted on the trains, which would be a first for a roller coaster, but nothing more is known about the train style or any other details. The next coaster would be a new twist and turn coaster named Voorang at Hopi Hari. This ride would travel inside an impressive pyramid facade with a turn outside and feature a train with a giant eyeball being held in a talon. There would also be an evolution of the inverted coaster the previous year, this time featuring a lift hill instead of a launch. Tornado would open at Parque de Atracciones Madrid, featuring 2 loops and a corkscrew, as well as many positive G-filled turns. But the real highlight of the year would take Intamin's lift technology to new heights. The emergence of the hypercoaster in the 90s became the peak of what parks could add as a standout coaster, and was attempted by many different manufacturers, but it was time for Intamin to take their swing. Themed to the most popular superhero of all time, Superman Ride of Steel would tower over the skyline of the now Six Flags Darien Lake. Every megacoaster of the time featured layouts focused almost exclusively on large hills that would get progressively smaller during the ride. Superman would feature a layout with a focus on long straight sections and 2 massive double helixes to showcase the speed of the coaster above the beautiful setting on the water. Along with this was a brand new 8-car train that featured a completely unique exposed seating style compared to other manufacturers, with an incredibly comfortable and thin lap bar. the speed, smoothness, and diverse layout would attract many parks' attention for the next year and many more to come. At the turn of the millennium, there were signs. Intamin had now fully come into their own, and the time for experimenting was over. As they were one of the 3 manufacturers at the time with the ability to build launch coasters, they were now a go-to, if not the most desired manufacturer, and 2000 would be the true landmark year for them. First was another wooden coaster named Regina at Tobu Zoo. This giant woody featured an intense layout over water with a large helix and many steep drops. The coaster recently sat without operating for 4 years before being fully retracked and receiving new trains from Great Coasters International and going by Regina 2. Six Flags had proved to be Intamin's favorite customer over their entire history, and that was not going to change with 3 more massive coasters this year, all themed to the Man of Steel. The first was Superman Ultimate Escape at Six Flags Ohio, a new impulse coaster. This model featured 2 key differences from the prototype, a twisting spike going forward and a holding brake on the spike going backwards to stop the trains for a moment before releasing, giving an extra thrill to riders. The second coaster would be a near exact copy of Superman Ride of Steel from the previous year, down to the name at Six Flags America. While the coaster had the same layout, it would not have the same setting, taking place in the woods rather than above water. The last would also be named Superman Ride of Steel, this time at Six Flags New England, but would take Intamin's hyper technology to a whole new level. While having the same track length as the other 2 mega coasters, this layout would drop the straight track and 2 helixes for one of the best layouts ever created. Featuring incredible hills, tunnels, and amazing lateral turns, the coaster has consistently been considered a top steel coaster ever made. But if that's not your style. Returning to the park Intamin had built their first coaster at, Cedar Point was ready to end the argument for best coaster park in the world. They weren't trying to build a great coaster, they were trying to build the best coaster of all time. Reaching heights over 300 feet, speeds over 90 miles per hour, and a layout over 6,000 feet, Millennium Force would reach stats thought untouchable for a coaster and became a massive hit for the park. To reach this height, Intamin developed an elevator cable lift system to take the train up faster, as well as not needing the massive chain that would be required for such height. The setting right along the lake and above the island is one of the most iconic for many visitors, and its layout focusing on sheer speed more than airtime or any specific elements made the ride more thrilling and unique to other coasters. This would strengthen an already strong relationship with Intamin and Cedar Point, and this, along with New England's Ride of Steel, gave the company 2 strong contenders for best thrill machines ever built. This momentum would propel Intamin into the hearts of coaster lovers and into the eyes of every park in the world. As if it wasn't known already, Intamin was ready to be king. After building 5 coasters the previous year, including 3 that were at least 200 feet, demand did not slow down at all, with 8 coasters opening in 2001. Kicking it off was their second coaster for Disney, this time being an opening day attraction at the new California Adventure Park. Being constructed with a very unique steel structure to mimic the look of a wooden boardwalk coaster, California Screamin' featured a less thrilling layout than the coasters that opened the previous year, but still featured an LIM launch, 1 inversion, and an over 6,000 foot layout. The coaster also featured onboard audio with an original soundtrack, which was still very impressive for the time. There would also be 3 more Twist and Spike impulse coasters, with Screaming Condor at Leo Fo Village and V2 Vertical Velocity at Six Flags Great America and Six Flags Discovery Kingdom. These were all clones their opening year, until California height restrictions required modifications to the vertical velocity at Discovery Kingdom. As a result, the back spike was cut from its original 185 feet to 150 feet, and the forward spike was turned on its side, resulting in the twist now being an inversion. This made it certainly the most unique impulse coaster, and it still operates in this state today. Next would be their second and last ever suspended looping coaster, ironically also named Tornado, at Finland's Sarkaniemi. This installation was much more inversion focused, with a loop, cobra roll, and 2 heartline rolls, including one over the station. With this new identity of giant thrill rides being the standard, it was time for Intamin to give one of their original models a last hurrah. Elf would open at Hirakata Park as the last traditional wooden coaster Intamin would ever construct. It would feature an oval layout with simple turns and drops, and may have inspired the layout of a coaster that would open a few years later. While Elf would be the end of the traditional wooden coasters, Intamin was shelving it for something new entirely. Using the same precision of fabricating steel coasters, Intamin came up with a concept to build all the track needed for wooden coasters in their factory, so no wood-cutting construction was needed on site. This method for prefabricated track would debut just 1 month after Elf on Colossus at Heidi Park. It would debut as the 3rd tallest and 2nd fastest wooden coaster in the world, and provided a vastly smoother ride than those ahead of it. New 3-row wooden coaster trains were developed for this model, with similar lap bars to the mega coasters, and helped navigate the trains over incredibly strong ejector airtime hills, with power that had never been attempted on a wooden coaster. To finish 2001 would be a smaller stature mega coaster for the small holiday park in Germany. While on the surface, the stats didn't seem to stand out as much as the crazy coasters that had opened this year and the last, but it would be widely regarded again as their best design to that point. Even to the point of its designer Werner Stengel claiming Expedition G-Force to be his favorite design. Using the same cable lift developed for Millennium Force, but at nearly half the height, this ride would begin with a wicked twisting drop and provide an incredible layout filled with airtime and laterals through the woods. The next year would be another of great steel behemoths taking shape, starting with another mega coaster for Six Flags Holland. Goliath would stand even shorter than Expedition G-Force, but still provide a very satisfying layout, similar to the original Superman Ride of Steel coasters. The one new element introduced for this ride would be a banked diving drop that would be known as a Stengel dive, named after the ride's designer. Also opening would be the last twist and turn coaster known as Sahara Twist at Liofo Village. Cedar Point would also return with the tallest impulse coaster to date, Wicked Twister. The coaster reached heights over 200 feet and featured twists on both spikes. Intamin would also build another 8 inversion coaster known as Avalancha at Guatemala's Chetulul. This would also be the same color scheme as Mont Macaya, but with a new train innovation. Using the same chassis as the mega coaster trains, these would be retrofitted to have the over-the-shoulder restraints instead of lap bars. Not only was this debuted on Avalancha, but for an even bigger multi-inversion coaster. Colossus would open at Thorpe Park as the world's first coaster to feature 10 inversions. The layout would be the same as the 8 inversion coasters, but replacing the triple heartline roll for an even crazier quadruple heartline roll, and removing the final helix for another heartline roll for the finale. Finally, the speed was about to get turned up even more with the debut of another new launch system. While the LSM magnets were still in their infancy, Intamin developed a system that was capable of a much faster and more powerful acceleration. This hydraulic launch system used a cable pulling a catch car attached to the train to blast riders down the track with incredible force. This accelerator coaster would fittingly debut on Accelerator at Knott's Berry Farm, rocketing riders from 0 to 82 miles per hour in just 2.3 seconds to crest a 200-foot first-of-its-kind top hat element. This would be a steep parabolic crest that would become a popular tall element for coasters to launch into, and was followed up by some fast overbank turns. While this system would prove to be somewhat unreliable, The powerful, eye-catching launch still turned the heads of many parks around the world. "2003 could be seen as the end of the original coaster wars, as world events started to slow parks from investing as much into massive rides. But Intamin would finish it off with a bang with 7 new coasters, all of which being different models. Starting it off would be the second prefabricated wooden coaster known as Balder at Leesburg. This would be a smaller coaster than Colossus, but still featured a smooth ride with many airtime hills and an oval layout that may have been inspired by the previously mentioned Elf. Next would be the last of the original Impulse coasters, being Steel Venom at Valley Fair. This would be the last twist and spike model, but with one shuttle coaster ending, a new one would rise. This time, riders would be seated in 2 spinning circles of 8 on a giant skateboard-like ride vehicle and would travel up 2 vertical spikes. This ride experience mimicked a skater going up and down a half-pipe, so the model and coaster were fittingly named that. The first would open at Sarkaniemi, where it would operate for 15 years. Following that up would be an incredibly unique multi-looper located inside a mall in Malaysia. Strangely featuring the old multi-looping trains, Supersonic Odyssey at Cosmos World would feature a compact layout full of tight turns, but also a heartline roll, a loop wrapping a bridge, and a corkscrew. Not to be outdone for a coaster in a dynamic location, Tokyo Dome City would once again ask Intamin to build a coaster on top of a building at their park. This time, instead of a straight-line coaster, the ride would feature perhaps the most ambitious engineering location of any ride ever. Thunder Dolphin would be a massive 262-foot mega coaster that would be built entirely on top of a parking garage and a building in earthquake-prone downtown Tokyo. The coaster was ingeniously designed to have high-speed moments, but to slow down at just the right times to not exert too much force when jumping over and through the buildings. It's not often Intamin will build a pure one-off coaster model, but there are the rare exceptions. Atlantis Adventure at Lot World is certainly a coaster that many would take a first glance at and not think too much, but the impact of this ride is far greater than you may expect. First of all, the coaster featured a single low-profile 8-passenger train, almost similar to the prefabricated wooden coaster cars, and feature handlebars to almost mimic a straddle riding position. Second, this would be the first coaster to have an LSM lift as well as an LSM launch, used to blast through and above the immaculately themed Atlantis Temple. Finally, this ride would be known as an Aquatrax coaster and have sections of water spraying at the bottom of the train to mimic splashing through a water trough. While this ride model didn't catch on, several design aspects of future coasters can be drawn back to this ride. To close the year and the entire coaster wars out, Cedar Point would once again dare any park to challenge their record-breaking ability. While Millennium Force broke the height record when it opened, it was beaten just 3 months later by the Morgan-built Steel Dragon 2000 in Japan. Not only that, it could still be said that Superman the Escape at Magic Mountain was always taller and faster, even though it did not complete a full circuit. To end all these debates, Cedar Point would use the hydraulic launch technology developed the year before to build the undisputed tallest and fastest roller coaster in the world. Top Thrill Dragster would launch riders 120 miles per hour in 4 seconds to crest a 420-foot top hat, finishing with a spiraling drop towards the ground. While the coaster essentially just did one element, the engineering scale of the ride and power of the launch was a thing to marvel. With this, Intamin had now built half of the 10 tallest coasters ever made in just 6 years, and held on to their title of being the only manufacturer willing and able to reach the highest heights. After years of breaking records and developing a handful of new models, the industry would slow down as Intamin would debut just 2 coasters for 2004. There would be another half-pipe coaster at Six Flags Elitch Gardens, as well as the Accelerator Stormrunner at Hershey Park. This would be the first hydraulic launch coaster with a full layout, featuring a top hat, a uniquely shaped dive loop, and the absolutely wicked element known as the flying snake dive. This inversion would feature a sort of double heartline roll that would violently dive at the end of its second twist. This coaster would also use a prototype train, with a chassis similar to the mega coasters and new multi-loopers, but having new over-the-shoulder restraint system, with a large round lap bar and thin but hard shoulder restraints, which would become the standard for most Intamin accelerators from then on. – 2005 would see a trio of coasters be built in Japan, starting with another coaster for Disney at the immaculately themed Tokyo Disney Sea. Raging Spirits would be a near exact copy of Indiana Jones et le Temple du Peril, down to the very old-style trains, but with an original theme and located in the park's Lost River Delta section. Also opening would be the very strange and unique Galaxy Express 999 at Aqua Park. Themed to a very popular manga and anime series, riders would be sent out of the station with a tire-propelled launch through an indoor layout with space lighting effects and a loop. Only one on-ride video exists of the coaster, and since it was all indoors, it is hard to tell what the ride experience fully consisted of. But given its launch system and one-of-a-kind train, it certainly was a very unique coaster. Also worth noting, the Don Quixote outlet store must have been inspired by Tokyo Dome City down the street, as they attempted to build another half-pipe coaster on their roof. The coaster never opened, as it was believed the building was unable to handle the forces exerted from the ride, and it sat for over 10 years before being removed. This year was undoubtedly the year of the accelerator coaster though, as 5 opened, all featuring the new trains and over-the-shoulder restraints. Starting with the smallest, Alton Towers would look to Intamin to build their next secret weapon. Due to the park's rules of not being able to build coasters over the trees, Rita, Queen of Speed, would launch from 0 to 61 miles per hour and twist and turn no more than 70 feet off the ground. Not much taller, Leesburg's Cannonin would launch to a slower speed than Rita, but feature a tighter layout with 2 inversions including a loop and a slow downward inline twist at the end. The next would be Skycar at Mysterious Island, featuring an intense layout with a vertical loop, followed by Superman Escape at Warner Bros. Movie World, Australia. This ride would feature a full pre-launch section with incredible theming and effects, followed by many airtime hills and turns, with a figure of Superman to push you along the way. But these would hardly be noteworthy compared to the last coaster of the year. When Cedar Point challenged any park to beat their height record, only one was able to stand up to the task, and that would be Six Flags Great Adventure. Beating Dragster's height by 36 feet and top speed by 8 miles per hour, King Dakar would be the self-proclaimed king of coasters at a shocking 456 feet tall. Also featuring a hill after the drop, King Dakar reached heights that other parks have only dreamed of, and remains the tallest coaster in the world to this day. – 2006 would be a bit of a slowdown year for Intamin, as it would see the end of a few models and many similar layouts to years before, but still had many huge rides of note opening. There would be the final 8 inversion coaster with Flight of the Phoenix at Harborland, and a final installation of the original 10 inversion roller coaster layout, named simply that, at Chimelong Paradise, as well as the last half-pipe coaster at the same park. This year would also see 3 more accelerator coasters open as well, starting with Stealth at Thorpe Park and Saturn at Space World. These 2 coasters featured the same layout and were nearly half the stats of King Dakar in every way, including a hill at the end, but with a straight drop instead of a twist. Also opening would be Tussenfried's Speed Monster, featuring a very scenic layout through the trees, with a unique inversion known as a Norwegian loop, given the park's location. This inversion would enter the loop from the top, twist down, and then twist back upright at the apex. The ride also featured a corkscrew at the end and many banked hills throughout, and would be Intamin's first attempt at using a shorter 3-car train for a more snappy ride experience. But easily, the crown jewel of the year would come from Intamin's third prefabricated wooden coaster, El Toro. Just 1 year after adding the tallest coaster in the world, Intamin and Great Adventure would return for a ride full of incredible airtime never seen on a wooden coaster in the United States. This would also be the first prefabricated coaster to use a cable lift and have a fast-paced twister finale full of low-to-the-ground turns and become a fan favorite for all roller coaster riders in America. After fleshing out their worldwide lineup of attractions, it was time for Intamin to start experimenting again, with almost every coaster for 2007 being a new model. This would start with Intamin's take on the Fourth Dimension coaster. Aerodynamics premiered this concept with X at Six Flags Magic Mountain, and then SNS would build a similar coaster the year before with Ijinaika at Fuji-Q Highland. These coasters would seat riders outside the track, with an extra rail rotating the seats to a predetermined position. These coasters were also massive 200-plus foot coasters with large multi-car trains. Intamin would scale this concept way back to a single car that would seat riders back to back and would freely spin through a less than 100-foot tall layout known as the Zack Spin. These coasters would also rotate around the backs of riders and feature a similar restraint to the accelerator coasters, but with softer fabric straps. The first two to open would be Kirnu at Linnanmäki and Inferno at Terra Mythica, and would have the same layout, consisting of a unique double-chain curved lift and one big drop to try to flip riders and then a hop into the brakes. The next new model would be another take of another manufacturer's concept, with Mick Doohan's Moto Coaster at Dreamworld. Vekoma had introduced the Booster Bike coaster a few years before, where riders were seated as if they were on motorcycles to give a unique seating position. Intamin's would be themed to the famous Australian motorbike racer, and feature a tire launch through a few low turns. The coaster featured a unique restraint where riders would have to lift a padded bar above their backs and then pull the front of the bike onto themselves. Australia would also see the debut of the second generation of the halfpipe with Surf Rider at Wet n Wild Waterworld. This version would feature a shorter, singular surfboard that would seat only 6 riders on each circle instead of 8, and spikes that were slightly beyond vertical. The year would also see another 2 hydraulic launch coasters, one being familiar with Desert Race at Heidi Park, which would be a near clone of Rita Queen of Speed, and a second that would be something completely different than anything seen before. At the same time Intamin was working on rotating seats outside the track, they also developed a fixed version where riders would sit on the wings but experience a traditional layout. This would debut on Furious Baco at Port Aventura, which would use a hydraulic launch to blast riders from 0 to 84 miles per hour in 3.5 seconds into a low-to-the-ground layout with a slow inline twist while seated on the outside of the track. This would turn out to be the only time this train style was used, making this a very unique and desirable ride for many. While some of the results of the experimenting of 2007 were mixed, their next coaster would shape their entire trajectory for years to come. Working on their 6th coaster for Cedar Point, Maverick would debut as Intamin's first true blitz, or what is now known as a multi-launch coaster. After only building the biggest and best versions of their coasters for Cedar Point, it was decided to scale down and deliver a new generation dynamic and reliable coaster style. Using the shorter 3-car trains of Speed Monster, the LSM lift of Atlantis Adventure, and the snappiness of many other accelerator coasters before, Maverick was the true amalgamation of many years of innovations at Intamin and proved to be a massive success. The coaster did have a delayed opening due to the heartline roll of the ride exerting too much force on the trains, but once the ride opened, it was hard to notice anything was missing due to how incredible the rest of the ride was. Featuring a beyond vertical drop, a twisted horseshoe roll inversion, which consisted of 2 corkscrews, and some of the snappiest turns and single dives attempted yet, Maverick completely changed the game, and now the goal for parks was no longer to build the biggest rides ever, but the best rides ever. Intamin continued to innovate and build great versions of existing models in 2008, starting with Avatar Airbender at Nickelodeon Universe in the Mall of America. This indoor surf rider would be themed to the popular cartoon show and get very close to the skylights inside the mall. Intamin would also improve their straddle coaster style ride greatly with Jet Rescue at SeaWorld Australia. These trains would be greatly simplified with a jet ski style vehicle that retained a comfortable upright seating position with optional handlebars. This coaster would also feature 2 launches and a much more dynamic layout than the previous year's coaster. Hershey Park would once again contact Intamin to build a unique coaster that would be somewhere between a multi-inversion coaster and the Blitz style of Maverick the year before. The result was Fahrenheit, a coaster which featured the 3-car train, beyond vertical drop, and quick airtime moments of Maverick, but with Intamin's first true vertical lift hill instead of a launch. This was the same double chain lift of the Zack Spins, and dropped riders into a layout featuring 6 inversions, including the Norwegian loop from Speed Monster, a Cobra roll, and a double corkscrew. Arguably the best coaster of the year would come from the final prefabricated wooden coaster to be built, T-Express at Korea's Everland. With Son of Beast closing the next year, T-Express would soon become the tallest and 3rd longest wooden coaster in the world, and be the culmination of the 3 prefabs before it. Featuring the cable lift, steep drop, and rapid turns of El Toro, the massive hills of Colossus, and then after hitting the mid-course, it would complete the exact same layout of Balder. All these elements led many to believe T-Express to be the greatest of all the prefabs built, and a worthy finale to the model as one of the best Intamin has ever produced. While T-Express may have been a beast of a coaster, the other new model created for the year would be a worthy successor of things to come. Continuing the small stature design of Maverick, Intamin would develop a small-scale mini hypercoaster style layout known as a megalite. This layout would have the cable lift, steep drop, and strong airtime of the mega coasters, but at a height of just 100 feet. Intamin hoped this model would be a cheaper alternative to parks looking for a smaller scale ride while not compromising on quality at all, and the first 2 to open would be Kawasemi at Tobu Zoo and Piraten at Jers Summerland. The layout featured a drop directly into a low-to-the-ground turn that threaded the lift, followed by many steep airtime hills providing very strong airtime. Intamin would finish out the aughts with another wide range of different coasters, starting right where they left off with 2 more megalites, with Flyover Mediterranean at Happy Valley Janus and Simply Megalite at Happy Valley Shanghai. The new Shanghai park would also see the well-themed Mine Train coaster open, strangely featuring the layout and trains of Ulven at Bakken, neither of which had been used in over a decade. Speaking of Bakken, the oldest park in the world would once again work with Intamin for a truly bizarre and unique coaster. This would be the 3rd Intamin to be named Tornado, but instead of an inverted coaster, this would be a one-of-a-kind spinning coaster. Featuring the Zack Spin style over-the-shoulder straps, the single-car trains would take 4 riders facing each other abruptly up a high-speed double-chain lift, almost acting as a launch through a ridiculously intense layout. The quick spinning on top of a violent rapid-fire layout may have created a more intense ride than Bakken and Intamin were expecting, but it is still a coaster enthusiast favorite. The year would also see yet another hydraulic launch coaster in Senza Fiato at Miragica. This small-scale coaster would feature a sort of updated layout of Rita and Desert Storm, featuring a half top hat instead of the low bank turn after the launch. The year would also see the return of the Zack Spin with Insane at Gronelund. This would feature a larger layout with several small drops rather than the one large of the previous installations. But the real highlight to put the true exclamation point on the decade would be the second ever Blitz coaster at Mirabilandia in Italy. This version would feature only one launch, but would essentially be the culmination of almost every element Intamin had created over the last 10 years or so. Featuring the strong launch of Volcano, the top hat of Accelerator, the ejector airtime hill of Superman Ride of Steel, the low-to-the-ground turns of Rita, the single dive-like drops of Expedition G-Force, the high-speed Heartline roll of Maverick, and the slow inline twist of Cannonin, Ice Speed would be the perfect opus of what Intamin had achieved in these last 12 years, and would also be a preview into what was to come as well.